The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen such fear. 7 different alien species sat around the massive crystal table, their various forms of breathing creating an odd symphony of worry. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like walking trees, but they all shared the same expression of terror. Ambassador Zix Thara from the Veltari people stood up slowly. Her blue skin had turned pale, and her forearms shook as she activated the holographic display. The image that appeared made everyone in the room go quiet. It showed a star system that used to have 12 planets. Now it only had 3. The Devourers took Kepler 442 yesterday, she said in a voice that barely whispered. That makes it the 15th system we have lost in 4 months. The room stayed silent. Everyone knew what the Devourers were. They were like a disease that ate entire worlds. They looked like machines mixed with living creatures, and they could not be stopped. Every weapon the Council had tried failed. Every strategy ended in disaster. How many people lived there? Asked General Korth from the Mantid Federation. His insect-like head clicked nervously. 4 billion, Zix Thara replied. All gone in 6 hours. The youngest member of the council, Ambassador Zen from the Aquatic Collective, spoke up with bubbles forming around his words. What about our defense fleet at Proxima Station? Destroyed or absorbed, Zix Thara said. The Devourers do not just kill. They take our ships and make them part of their force. Our own weapons are now pointed at us. Elder Groban from the Stone People hit the table with his massive fist. Then we fight harder. We build bigger guns. With what? Zix Thara snapped. We have lost 60% of our industrial worlds. Our best scientists are dead. Our strongest warriors are either dead or feeding the enemy. She paused and looked around the room. We are dying, and nothing we do can stop it. The hall fell into a heavy silence. Each species had faced many wars before. They had conquered diseases, survived natural disasters, and built mighty civilizations among the stars. But the Devourers were different. They were like death itself, moving from star to star and leaving nothing behind. Ambassador Quo from the Synthetic Mines finally spoke. His mechanical voice echoed in the chamber. There is one option we have not discussed. Everyone turned to look at him. The synthetic beings were the smartest species in the council. If they had an idea, everyone wanted to hear it. The humans, Quo said simply. The reaction was immediate. Several ambassadors started talking at once. Others made sounds of disgust or anger. Elder Groban laughed, but it was not a happy sound. The primitives? He said. Those violent children who have not even left their own solar system properly? They are barbarians, agreed Commander Yeth from the Hive Collective. They still fight wars among themselves. They poison their own planet. They are everything we have moved beyond. Quo waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. They are also the only species that has never lost a war. Because they have never fought anyone but themselves, shouted Ambassador Kell from the Feathered Ones. Exactly, Quo said calmly. They spend all their time learning how to kill each other more efficiently. They have been doing this for thousands of years. They are very good at it. Zix Thara felt a chill run through her body. She had read the reports about humans. They were strange creatures who seemed to enjoy conflict. While other species had grown peaceful as they became advanced, humans had simply found new ways to make war. They had weapons that could destroy their own planet several times over. They had strategies that were both brilliant and terrifying. Their representative is here, Quo continued. "Captain Lisa Carter. She has been waiting in the outer chamber for 3 hours." "Waiting for what?" asked Ambassador Zen. "For us to ask for help," Quo replied. The idea seemed impossible. The Galactic Council was made up of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They had technology that could move stars and create life. Asking for help from a species that still used chemical rockets seemed like madness. But madness was better than extinction. "I will not beg primitives for help," Elder Groban declared. "Then you will die with your pride intact," Zixthera said quietly. "We all will." She walked to the communication panel and pressed a button. "Please send in Captain Carter." The human who entered the chamber was smaller than most of the aliens present. She wore a simple dark blue uniform with few decorations. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat style, and her green eyes moved around the room, taking in every detail. She walked to the center of the chamber and stopped. "Captain Lisa Carter, representing Earth," she said in a clear voice. "You asked to see me?" Zixthera stepped forward. The words she needed to say felt like poison in her mouth, but she said them anyway. "The Galactic Council formally requests military assistance from Earth in dealing with the Devourer threat." Captain Carter did not react with surprise or joy. She simply nodded as if she had been expecting this moment. "I see," she said. "And what makes you think Earth can help where the mighty Galactic Council has failed?" The question was asked politely, but there was something in her tone that made several ambassadors uncomfortable. It was not mockery exactly, but it was not respect either. "We are desperate," Zixthera admitted. "We have tried everything else." Captain Carter smiled, but it was not a warm expression. It was the kind of smile that made people want to step backward. "Desperation," she said slowly. "Yes, we understand desperation very well. We have built our entire civilization on it." She paused and looked around the room. "I will need to discuss this with my superiors, but I believe Earth will be happy to help." "What kind of help can you provide?" asked Ambassador Quo. "The best kind," Captain Carter replied. "We will send our specialists." "How many ships?" asked General Korth. "Ships are not the solution to your problem," Carter said. "We will send people, the right people." Something in the way she said, "the right people," made everyone in the room feel cold. There was a weight to those words that suggested things they did not want to understand. "When can they arrive?" Zixthera asked. "They are already prepared," Carter said. "We have been watching your situation for some time. We thought you might eventually ask for help." The idea that humans had been watching and waiting was disturbing, but Zixthera pushed the feeling aside. They needed help, and help was being offered. "Thank you," she said. Captain Carter nodded and turned to leave. As she reached the door, she stopped and looked back. "Ambassador Zixthera," she said, "you should know something before we begin." "What is that?" "The people we are sending," Carter said quietly. "Even we are afraid of them." Then she was gone, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, in a place that did not appear on any map, General Frank Rodriguez walked through corridors that few people knew existed. The walls were thick concrete, painted white, with no windows anywhere. Security. Cameras watched every step he took, and armed guards stood at every corner. This was Site Omega, and it held Earth's darkest secrets. Rodriguez carried a file marked with symbols that would make most government officials refuse to touch it. Inside were names of people who officially did not exist. People whose records were buried so deep that even the president only knew them as code names. He stopped at a heavy steel door marked only with the number 7. His hand pressed against a scanner, his eye looked into another scanner, and finally he spoke his name aloud. Only then did the door open. The room beyond looked like a normal conference room, except for the fact that it had no windows and only one way in or out. A long table sat in the center with chairs around it. But Rodriguez was not here for a normal meeting. He pressed a button on his phone and spoke 2 words: Code Black. Within minutes, they began to arrive. The first was Colonel Amy Walsh. She was 42 years old, with short blonde hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore a simple black uniform with no medals or decorations. The only thing that marked her as special was the way she moved, like a predator that was always ready to strike. Walsh had once held off an entire alien invasion force by herself for 6 hours. The official report said it was impossible. The Pakshir classified report said she had done things during those 6 hours that broke several international laws and most human moral codes. But she had won, and Earth was still free. "General," she said, taking a seat at the table. Next came Dr. Kevin Brooks. He looked like a normal scientist with messy brown hair and thick glasses. He carried a tablet computer and seemed more interested in reading than talking to anyone. But his psychological profile was classified at the highest levels for good reason. Brooks did not just plan battles, he planned the destruction of entire ways of thinking. He had once ended a war by convincing the enemy that their own gods wanted them to surrender. He had stopped a rebellion by making the rebels afraid of their own shadows. His mind worked in ways that frightened even the people who employed him. "Doctor?" Rodriguez nodded as Brooks sat down and immediately began typing on his tablet. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was the youngest of the group at 31. He had dark hair and a smile that never seemed to leave his face. But people who knew Morrison learned quickly not to trust that smile. He was what the military called a problem solver, which was a polite way of saying he made inconvenient people disappear. Morrison had grown up on the streets and learned early that survival meant being willing to do things that good people would not do. The military had found him in prison and given him a choice: serve or spend life behind bars. He had chosen to serve and discovered he had a talent for making the impossible happen. "Sir," Morrison said, still smiling as he took his seat. Captain Tony Martinez walked in next. He was a quiet man with dark skin and eyes that had seen too much. He had been a pilot once, then a soldier, then something else entirely. His file was so classified that even Rodriguez had never read all of it. What Rodriguez did know was that Martinez had volunteered for experiments that no sane person would agree to. He had allowed scientists to modify his body and mind in ways that pushed the limits of what it meant to be human. The results were classified, but Martinez was still alive and still serving, which said something about his usefulness. "Captain," Rodriguez acknowledged. The last to arrive was Sergeant Beth Adams. She was small and quiet, with red hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She looked like someone who might work in an office or teach children. But Adams was the most dangerous person in the room, and everyone knew it. She did not just kill people. She studied them first, learned everything about them, and then destroyed them in ways that were personal and complete. She could eliminate an entire enemy organization by targeting exactly the right people in exactly the right order. She was an artist, and death was her canvas. "Sergeant," Rodriguez said as she took the last chair, Now all 5 were seated around the table. These were the people that Earth's own government was afraid to use. They were kept hidden away in dark places, only brought out when the situation was so desperate that normal solutions would not work. Rodriguez opened the file and spread photographs across the table. They showed alien ships being torn apart by things that looked like machines mixed with living creatures. "Devourers," he said simply. "The Galactic Council is facing extinction, and they have asked for our help." Colonel Walsh picked up one of the photographs and studied it carefully. "Hive mind?" "Appears so," Rodriguez replied. "They convert other species into more of themselves. They consume entire star systems." Dr. Brooks looked up from his tablet for the first time. "Fascinating. A species that has solved the problem of individual survival by eliminating individuality entirely." "Can we fight them?" asked Morrison, still smiling. "The Galactic Council cannot," Rodriguez said. "They have lost 15 star systems in 4 months. But the Council thinks like civilized beings," said Captain Martinez quietly. "They follow rules of war. They try to minimize casualties. They want to win cleanly." "And we do not," Adams said. It was not a question. Rodriguez nodded. "The alien species that make up the Council have evolved beyond the need for violence. They have forgotten how to truly fight. But we have not forgotten. We have never forgotten." Walsh leaned back in her chair. "What are our orders?" "Stop the Devourers," Rodriguez said. "Use any methods necessary. The Council has given us complete authority." "Do they understand what that means?" Brooks asked with interest. "No," Rodriguez replied. "They think they do. But they have no idea what humans are capable of when we stop pretending to be civilized." The room fell quiet for a moment. Each person around the table was thinking about what they could do with no limits and no oversight. The possibilities were both exciting and terrifying. "Timeline?" Walsh asked. "The ship leaves in 6 hours," Rodriguez said. "You will have a small crew and everything you need. The Council is expecting a large military force. Instead, they are getting you." Morrison laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "They asked for help. They are going to get it." Rodriguez stood up and looked around the table one more time. These 5 people had skills that no civilized society should need. They were reminders of humanity's violent past, kept around in case the galaxy turned out to be more dangerous than anyone hoped. Now that day had come. "One more thing," Rodriguez said. "When this is over, when the Devourers are gone, the Council will know what we are really capable of. They will know that humans are not the primitive species they thought we were. They will know that we are something much worse. Or much better," Walsh said quietly, "depending on your point of view." Rodriguez nodded and walked toward the door. "The ship is called Nightfall. Try not to live up to the name." But as he left the room, he knew they would. These 5 people were about to show the galaxy what humans could do when they stopped holding back. The Devourers thought they were the most dangerous thing in space. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The ship Nightfall dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Veltar system like a shadow against the stars. It was small compared to the massive Council warships that filled the space around Veltar Prime, no bigger than a transport vessel. Its black hull absorbed light instead of reflecting it, making it hard to see even when you were looking right at it. Admiral Kethvor of the Veltari Navy watched the human ship approach through the viewport of his flagship, the Eternal Dawn. He was not impressed. The Eternal Dawn was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to crack a moon. The human ship looked like it might hold a few dozen people at most. "This is what Earth sends us?" he said to his aide, Commander Veltar. One small ship? Veltar checked his scanner readings again. Sir, I am detecting only 12 life forms aboard the human vessel. 12? Admiral Kethvor's 4 eyes widened in disbelief. The Council asked for military assistance and they send us 12 people. Around them, the bridge crew of the Eternal Dawn tried not to show their own disappointment. They had heard stories about humans and their violent nature. They had expected warships bristling with weapons, or at least a proper military force. Instead, they got what looked like a pleasure craft with barely enough people to crew it. Maybe they are scouts, suggested Commander Veltar. Perhaps the main fleet is coming later? Admiral Kethvor shook his head. His people had been fighting the Devourers for 6 months. They had lost 3 colony worlds and half their fleet. They needed help now, not scouts who would take weeks to report back to Earth. The communication system crackled to life. Veltari, flagship. This is the human vessel Nightfall requesting permission to dock. The voice was calm and professional, with no hint of emotion. Admiral Kethvor wondered if all humans sounded so cold. Permission granted, he replied. Docking Bay 7. As the human ship moved toward the docking bay, Admiral Kethvor called for an honor guard. If Earth had sent representatives, he would receive them with proper ceremony, even if he was disappointed by their numbers. 20 minutes later, the docking bay doors opened and the humans emerged. Admiral Kethvor had seen humans before, but only in videos and photographs. In person, they seemed smaller and more fragile than he had expected. They wore simple black uniforms with no decorations or medals. Their leader was a blonde female who looked around the docking bay with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. I am Colonel Amy Walsh, she said, stepping forward. Earth Response Team Alpha. Admiral Kethvor, commanding the Veltari Defense Fleet, he replied. We welcome Earth's assistance in our time of need. But even as he said the words, Admiral Kethvor felt a growing sense of disappointment. 12 humans against the Devourer threat? It seemed like a cruel joke. Colonel Walsh seemed to sense his feelings. You were expecting more of us. I was expecting something, Admiral Kethvor admitted. We face an enemy that has destroyed entire fleets. We have lost millions of lives. And Earth sends 12 people? Earth sends the right people, Walsh replied calmly. Behind her, the other humans said nothing. They stood quietly and watched everything around them with an intensity that made Admiral Kethvor uncomfortable. There was something about the way they moved, the way they held themselves, that suggested they were more dangerous than they appeared. One of them, a small red-headed female, was studying the Veltari honor guard with open curiosity. Another, a dark-skinned male, was examining the technology of the docking bay like he was looking for weaknesses. A third human, wearing glasses and carrying a tablet, was making notes about something that Admiral Kethvor could not identify. Perhaps you would like to meet with our command staff, Admiral Kethvor suggested. We can brief you on the current situation. That would be helpful, Walsh agreed. As they walked through the corridors of the Eternal Dawn, Admiral Kethvor tried to make conversation. How long did it take you to travel from Earth? 2 weeks, Walsh replied. And what is your military background, Colonel? I solve problems, Walsh said simply. It was not much of an answer, but something in her tone suggested that Admiral Kethvor should not ask for more details. They reached the main briefing room where the senior staff of the Veltari Defense Fleet was waiting. Admiral Kethvor had called together his best officers, hoping to make a good impression on their human allies. Instead, he watched as the humans filed into the room and took seats without ceremony. "This is General Mordak, my tactical officer," Admiral Kethvor began, trying to maintain normal protocol. The humans nodded politely but said nothing. They seemed more interested in studying the room and the people in it than in formal introductions. "Perhaps we should discuss the enemy," suggested General Mordak. He activated a holographic display that showed the current positions of Devourer forces. "They have taken 15 systems in the past 4 months. Their tactics are unlike anything we have faced before." Dr. Brooks, the human with glasses, looked up from his tablet. "Show us their attack patterns." For the next hour, the Veltari officers explained everything they knew about the Devourers. They showed battle recordings, tactical analyses, and casualty reports. The humans listened without interruption, occasionally asking questions that seemed strange or disturbing. "Do they show any emotional responses to casualties?" asked Dr. Brooks. "What is their reproductive cycle?" asked the red-headed female, Sergeant Adams. "How do they process individual identity before assimilation?" asked the quiet male, Captain Martinez. The questions made Admiral Kethvor uncomfortable, but he answered them as best he could. Finally, Colonel Walsh spoke up. "When is their next attack expected?" "Intelligence suggests they will hit the mining station at Kepler 438b within the next 6 hours, General Mordak replied. "We have evacuated most of the civilian population, but we cannot abandon the facility entirely. The rare minerals there are essential to our war effort." "Good," Walsh said. "We would like to observe." Admiral Kethvor stared at her. "Observe? Do you not plan to help defend the station?" "Not yet," Walsh replied. "We need to see how they fight before we can determine how to defeat them." "The station will be destroyed," General Mordak protested. "Thousands of lives will be lost." "Yes," Walsh agreed calmly. "That is unfortunate. But if we act without understanding our enemy, many more lives will be lost later." The coldness in her voice shocked the Veltari officers. They had expected their human allies to share their urgency, their desire to save every life possible. Instead, the humans seemed to view the coming battle as a learning opportunity. "You would let people die just to gather information?" Admiral Kethvor asked. Colonel Walsh looked at him with those cold blue eyes. "Admiral, your people have been fighting this enemy for months and losing every engagement. You have tried courage, honor, and superior technology. None of it has worked." She stood up and walked to the holographic display. "We are going to try something different. We are going to learn how they think, how they feel, and how they die. And then we are going to use that knowledge to destroy them completely." The way she said completely made everyone in the room go quiet. There was something in that word that suggested the humans had ideas that the Veltari did not want to understand. Very. "Well," Admiral Kethvor said finally, "you may observe from the command deck." As the meeting broke up, Admiral Kethvor found himself wondering what Earth had really sent them. 12 humans who spoke of death and destruction as calmly as others discussed the weather. 12 people who seemed to view war not as a necessary evil, but as a puzzle to be solved. He had a growing feeling that the Devourers were about to face something they had never encountered before. And despite himself, Admiral Kethvor was not sure that was a good thing. The attack on Kepler 438b began at exactly 14:30 ship time, just as Veltari intelligence had predicted. On the command deck of the Eternal Dawn, Admiral Kethvor watched his screens fill with contact signals as Devourer ships dropped out of hyperspace. Beside him, the 12 humans stood quietly and observed. They did not seem worried or excited by the coming battle. They watched the enemy approach like scientists studying insects under glass. 18 Devourer vessels, reported Commander Veltar. Standard configuration. Heavy assault ships supported by conversion pods. Admiral Kethvor nodded grimly. It was the same pattern they had seen 15 times before. The Devourers would overwhelm the defenses with their larger ships, then use the smaller conversion pods to begin the process of turning captured vessels into more Devourer units. All ships prepare for engagement, he ordered. The Veltari defense fleet moved to intercept. 12 heavy cruisers and 36 smaller vessels against 18 Devourer ships. On paper, the numbers looked almost even. In reality, Admiral Kethvor knew they were about to lose again. Dr. Brooks stepped closer to the tactical display, his tablet ready to record everything. Admiral, could you have your communications officer monitor all Devourer transmissions? I want to hear how they coordinate their attacks. Of course, Admiral Kethvor replied, though he wondered what the human hoped to learn. The Devourers used some kind of machine language that no one had been able to decode. The first shots were fired at maximum range. Veltari energy beams lanced out toward the approaching enemy, striking several Devourer ships. The hits registered on the tactical display, but the enemy vessels continued their approach without slowing down. Their armor is adaptive, General Mordak observed. Each hit makes them more resistant to that type of weapon. Sergeant Adams nodded as if this was interesting rather than terrifying. How quickly do they adapt? Within seconds, General Mordak replied. Fascinating, Dr. Brooks murmured, making notes on his tablet. The Devourer ships returned fire, and Admiral Kethvor watched 2 of his cruisers disappear from the tactical display in the first volley. The enemy weapons were different from anything the Council had seen before. Some kind of energy beam that did not just destroy but seemed to consume matter itself. Veltari ship Stormcaller is reporting unusual readings, Commander Veltar announced. Their hull is being converted at the molecular level. On the main screen, they could see the Stormcaller being transformed. Its elegant curved hull was becoming angular and dark, sprouting the organic-looking appendages that marked all Devourer technology. Within minutes, the ship that had been defending the station was turning its guns on its former allies. Captain Martinez watched this transformation with obvious interest. How long before the crew is converted? Usually about 10 minutes, General Mordak answered. The process is apparently quite painful. Do you have any recordings of the conversion process? Asked Martinez. Admiral Kethvor stared at the human. Why would you want to hear such things? To understand them, Martinez replied calmly. The battle continued to go badly for the Veltari forces. Their ships were faster and more maneuverable than the Devourer vessels, but every hit they scored seemed to make the enemy stronger. Meanwhile, any ship that took damage from Devourer weapons was either destroyed outright or began the terrible process of conversion. Lieutenant Morrison had been quiet throughout the battle, but now he spoke up. Their formation is interesting, very rigid, no improvisation. They are a hive mind, explained General Mordak. All decisions come from a central intelligence. That makes them predictable, Morrison observed, but also very efficient. Within 30 minutes, half the Veltari fleet was gone. Admiral Kethvor gave the order to retreat, knowing that staying would only result in more ships being lost or converted. The remaining vessels pulled back to a safe distance and watched as the Devourers began their work on the mining station. The process was swift and methodical. The station's defenses were overwhelmed in minutes. Then the conversion. Pods attached themselves to the hull and began the transformation. Metal became something that was part machine and part living tissue. The geometric human-built structures sprouted organic growths and weapon systems. But it was the fate of the people on the station that truly horrified the Veltari crew. They could hear the screams and pleas for help over the communication channels for the first few minutes. Then the voices changed, becoming monotone and mechanical as the station's population was absorbed into the Devourer collective. "Turn off the communications," Admiral Kethvor ordered. He could not bear to listen anymore, but Dr. Brooks stepped forward quickly. "No, please leave them on. I need to hear this." "Doctor, those are people dying," Admiral Kethvor protested. "Yes," Brooks replied without emotion, "and I need to understand how they die." For the next hour, the humans listened to the sounds of an entire station being consumed. They took notes, asked questions, and showed no sign of distress at what they were hearing. The Veltari crew members who could not leave their posts looked sick, but the humans seemed fascinated. "The initial conversion appears to target the nervous system," Dr. Brooks observed. "The subjects retain consciousness during the early stages." "That explains the psychological impact," added Sergeant Adams. "Fear is a weapon for them." The Hive. "Mind integration happens gradually," noted Captain Martinez. "There is a period where the subjects are aware of what is happening but cannot resist." Admiral Kethvor finally could not stand it anymore. "How can you listen to this so calmly? Those are living beings suffering and dying." Colonel Walsh looked at him with those cold blue eyes. "Admiral, we are not here to save the people on that station. We are here to learn how to save everyone else." When the conversion was complete, the Devourer fleet moved on, leaving behind a station that was now part of their network. The mining facility continued to operate, but now it fed materials to the Devourer war machine instead of the Galactic Council. 17 hours from first contact to complete conversion, Dr. Brooks noted. "Very efficient." "They left no survivors," General Mordak said quietly. "No," Walsh agreed. "They never do. That is why they are so effective. No one escapes to spread fear or warn others." The command deck fell into silence as the crew processed what they had witnessed. Another defeat, another facility lost, another few thousand lives consumed by the enemy. It was the same pattern they had seen over and over, but the humans seemed satisfied with what they had learned. "We have seen enough," Walsh announced. "We would like to meet with the senior council representatives now." "What for?" asked Admiral Kethvor. "To discuss our plan," Walsh replied. "You have a plan already?" General Mordak asked with surprise. "Based on watching one battle?" Dr. Brooks looked up from his tablet and smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "We have been studying humanity's approach to warfare for our entire lives. What we just saw was not a battle. It was a process, and processes can be disrupted." Sergeant Adams nodded in agreement. "The Devourers think they understand war because they have been winning. But they have never fought anyone like us." "What makes you so different?" Admiral Kethvor asked. Captain Martinez answered in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. "We do not just fight to win, Admiral. We fight to make our enemies wish they had never been born." The way he said it made everyone on the command deck go cold. There was something in his tone that suggested the humans had ideas that were beyond anything the Veltari could imagine. "I will arrange the meeting," Admiral HFY said finally. As the humans left the command deck, General Mordak leaned close to Admiral HFY. "Sir, I am beginning to think we have made a terrible mistake asking for their help." Admiral HFY watched the humans disappear down the corridor. "Perhaps. But if the choice is between a terrible mistake and extinction, I know which one I prefer." But even as he said it, he wondered if he was right. The humans had watched thousands of people die without showing any emotion. They had listened to screams of agony and taken notes. They spoke of war and death like others discussed the weather. What kind of species produced people like that? And what would they do to the devourers when they finally revealed their plan? The secure meeting chamber aboard the Eternal Dawn had been cleared of all but the highest-ranking council representatives. Ambassador Zixathera sat at the head of the table, flanked by Admiral HFY and General Mordak. Across from them, the 12 humans waited patiently. The room itself was designed to prevent any form of electronic surveillance. Thick walls blocked all signals, and the air recycling system created enough background noise to defeat listening devices. Whatever was discussed here would remain secret. "Before we begin," Ambassador Zixathera said, "I want to thank Earth for responding to our request. Your willingness to help speaks well of your species." Colonel Walsh nodded politely but said nothing. Her silence made the ambassador uncomfortable, as if she was waiting for something specific before revealing her true thoughts. "We have observed your enemy," Walsh said finally. "We understand how they operate." "And?" Admiral HFY prompted. "They can be defeated," Walsh replied, "but not by conventional military action." Dr. Brooks opened his tablet and activated a holographic projector. The image that appeared showed a detailed analysis of Devourer ship construction and movement patterns. "The Devourers operate as a collective intelligence," he explained. "All decisions flow through a central command network. Individual units have no independent thought or initiative." "We know this," General Mordak said impatiently. "It is what makes them so efficient. It is also what makes them vulnerable." Dr. Brooks continued. "A hive mind is only as strong as its central processing system. Damage the core, and the entire network collapses." Ambassador Zixathera leaned forward with interest. "You believe you can locate their command center?" "We know where it is," Sergeant Adams said quietly. "The mothership at the center of their fleet formation. Every major engagement shows the same pattern. All orders originate from that vessel." "Many species have tried to attack the mothership," Admiral HFY pointed out. "The Mantid Federation lost their entire battle fleet in such an attempt, because they tried to fight their way to it," Walsh said. "We have a different approach." She gestured to Dr. Brooks, who changed the holographic display. Now it showed a schematic of something that looked like a computer virus, but far more complex than anything the Council had seen before. "We call it a cognitive virus," Dr. Brooks explained. "It is designed to infiltrate the devourer hive mind and disrupt their collective consciousness." "How?" asked Ambassador Zixathera. Dr. Brooks smiled, and the expression made everyone in the room uncomfortable. "By introducing concepts that a hive mind cannot process: individual identity, personal responsibility, guilt, fear of death as a unique entity rather than just another unit." "That is impossible," General Mordak protested. "You cannot simply insert ideas into another species' brain." "Not directly," Dr. Brooks agreed. "But if someone were to be partially assimilated into their network, while retaining individual consciousness, they could introduce these concepts from within. The room fell silent as the implications of what he was suggesting became clear. Someone would have to volunteer to be captured and partially converted by the devourers, then use their connection to the hive mind to plant a destructive virus. That is suicide, Admiral Kethvor said quietly. Not necessarily. Captain Martinez spoke for the first time since entering the room. The conversion process takes several hours. Someone with the right preparation might be able to retain enough individual consciousness to complete the mission. What kind of preparation? Ambassador Zixathera asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. Mental conditioning, Dr. Brooks replied. Psychological barriers designed to resist collective integration, and certain physical modifications that would slow the conversion process. You are talking about torture, General Mordak said with horror. Deliberate psychological and physical trauma to prepare someone for an even worse fate. Yes, Doctor, Brooks agreed calmly. That is exactly what we are talking about. Ambassador Zixathera felt sick. The plan was monstrous, requiring someone to voluntarily undergo procedures that would damage their mind and body, then submit to capture by an enemy that would slowly convert them into something inhuman. No civilized species would ask someone to do such a thing, she said. That is why you have been losing, Walsh replied without emotion. You fight with honor and dignity. You try to minimize casualties and preserve life. The devourers do not share these concerns. Lieutenant Morrison, who had been quietly examining the room's security systems, finally joined the conversation. The virus will need to be delivered at exactly the right moment. Too early and their defenses will detect it. Too late and the carrier will be fully converted and unable to act. How will you coordinate the timing? Asked Admiral Kethvor. We will create a diversion, Sergeant Adams explained. Multiple simultaneous attacks designed to overload their processing capacity. While they are dealing with those threats, our carrier will have a window of opportunity. What kind of diversion? General Mordak asked. The humans exchanged glances, and Ambassador Zixathara realized they were communicating in some way that did not require words. Finally, Walsh spoke. The kind that will require you to think of us as monsters rather than allies, she said. What do you mean? Ambassador Zixathara demanded. We will target devourer facilities that contain recently converted populations, Adams explained. The people who were just absorbed from the mining station, for example. We will show the hive mind what it looks like when its newest members die in agony. The room went completely silent. What the humans were proposing was beyond anything the Council had considered. They wanted to torture and kill people who had been converted by the devourers, using their deaths as a psychological weapon against the hive mind. Those people are victims, Admiral Kethvor protested. They did not choose to become part of the collective. No, Walsh agreed, but they are part of it now, and we will use their suffering to break their captors. That is evil, General Mordak said quietly. Yes, Dr. Brooks replied. It is, but it will work. Ambassador Zixathera struggled to process what she was hearing. The humans were offering to save the galaxy by committing acts that were worse than anything the Council had ever imagined. They spoke of torture and psychological warfare as calmly as others discussed military logistics. There has to be another way, she said. There is, Walsh replied. You can surrender, accept conversion, join the collective peacefully. That would certainly minimize suffering. The coldness in her voice made it clear that this was not really an option. The humans were offering a choice between victory through monstrous means or defeat through noble failure. Who would volunteer? For the infiltration mission? Admiral Kethvor asked. Captain Martinez raised his hand slightly. I will. You understand what it means? Dr. Brooks asked him. I understand, Martinez replied. I have been preparing for something like this for years. Ambassador Zixathara looked at the human who had just volunteered to undergo torture, mental conditioning, and then deliberate capture by humanity's most dangerous enemy. He seemed calm about it, as if he was discussing a routine assignment rather than a suicide mission. Why? She asked. Martinez looked at her with dark eyes that seemed much older than his apparent age. Because someone has to, and because I am probably the only person here who might survive it. Probably? General Mordak echoed. The success rate for this type of mission is approximately 30%, Dr. Brooks said matter-of-factly, but Captain Martinez has certain advantages that improve his odds. What kind of advantages? Admiral Kethvor asked. The humans exchanged those silent glances again. Finally, Walsh spoke. The kind that your species would find disturbing to discuss, she said. Ambassador Zixathara realized that they were not going to get more details about Martinez's preparations or modifications. The humans were willing to share their plan, but not the full extent of their capabilities. How long will you need to prepare? She asked. We are already prepared, Walsh replied. We can begin immediately. You came here knowing you would propose. This plan? General Mordak asked with alarm. We came here knowing that conventional warfare would not be sufficient, Walsh said. We developed several contingency plans during the journey. This one has the highest probability of success. Ambassador Zixathara looked around the table at the other council representatives. They all looked as disturbed as she felt. The humans were offering them victory, but at a price that challenged everything they believed about civilization and morality. We need time to consider this, she said finally. Time is not something you have, Walsh replied. The Devourers will attack. Another system within 48 hours. Every day you delay, more people die. It was true, and everyone in the room knew it. The choice was not between a good option and a bad option. It was between a terrible option and extinction. If we agree to this plan, Ambassador Zixathara said slowly, what guarantee do we have that it will work? Colonel Walsh stood up and looked directly at her. No guarantee. But I can promise you this. The Devourers have never faced an enemy like humanity. They have never encountered a species willing to sacrifice everything and everyone to achieve victory. They are about to learn what that feels like. The meeting ended with no formal decision, but everyone in the room. The research station at Epsilon Eridani was dying when Captain Tony Martinez made his choice. Through the viewport of the evacuation shuttle, he could see Devourer ships surrounding the facility like predators circling wounded prey. The station's defenses had fallen 20 minutes ago, and now the conversion process was beginning. Target acquired, he said into his communication device. Beginning infiltration protocol. On the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, Colonel Walsh watched the tactical display with cold precision. The plan was in motion, and every element had to work perfectly, or Martinez would die for nothing. Nightfall Team Alpha, begin harassment attacks, she ordered. Light years away, Sergeant Adams and Lieutenant Morrison initiated the first phase of their diversion. Their small ship, barely visible on sensors, approached a recently converted mining facility and began what the official reports would later call psychological warfare operations. What they actually did was something that no civilized species would have imagined. The facility had been taken by the Devourers only days before. Its population of 12,000 had been absorbed into the collective, their individual minds subsumed into the hive network. They were no longer truly alive in any meaningful sense, but they retained enough of their original neural patterns to feel pain. Adams and Morrison exploited this weakness with surgical precision. Using weapons designed specifically for this mission, they began systematically torturing the converted population, not to kill them, but to force them to experience agony while still connected to the hive mind. Every scream, every moment of suffering was transmitted directly into the collective consciousness. The effect was immediate and devastating. The devourer hive mind, which had never experienced individual suffering, was suddenly flooded with the pain of thousands of tortured minds. It was like introducing a virus into a computer system that had no defense against that type of attack. Phase 1 successful, Adams reported calmly over the communication link. The hive network is showing signs of strain. Meanwhile, Martinez guided his shuttle toward the research station with careful precision. He had to time his approach perfectly. Too early, and the Devourers would simply destroy his ship. Too late, and the station's conversion would be complete, making infiltration impossible. Dr. Brooks monitored the operation from the Nightfall, tracking both the psychological attack and Martinez's approach. His tablet showed readouts that would have horrified anyone who understood what they represented. Heart rates of torture victims, neural activity patterns during forced conversion, stress indicators from the devourer hive mind itself. Psychological saturation approaching optimal levels, he reported. Captain Martinez, you have a 4-minute window. Martinez acknowledged the transmission and began his final approach. His shuttle was modified to appear as a damaged escape pod, the kind of vessel that Devourers typically captured for conversion rather than destroyed outright. He had to make his capture look accidental while ensuring it happened at exactly the right moment. "This is Captain Martinez to any friendly forces," he broadcast on emergency frequencies. "My engines are failing. I am going down." The deception worked. 3 Devourer ships moved to intercept the shuttle, their conversion pods already extending to capture the apparently helpless human vessel. As the alien technology began to envelop his shuttle, Martinez felt the first effects of the conversion process. It started as a tingling sensation in his hands and feet, then spread rapidly through his nervous system. Most beings would have lost consciousness within seconds as their neural patterns were overwhelmed by the collective network. But Martinez was not like most beings. For 3 years, he had undergone modifications that pushed the boundaries of human biology. His nervous system had been altered to resist outside interference. His brain had been conditioned to maintain individual consciousness, even under extreme stress. His body had been changed in ways that the official records would never reveal. The conversion process that should have taken minutes stretched into hours. Martinez remained aware and functional even as alien technology began rewriting his cellular structure. He could feel the hive mind trying to absorb his thoughts, but his mental defenses held. "Infiltration successful," he whispered into a concealed transmitter. "Beginning virus upload." On the Nightfall, Dr. Brooks monitored Martinez's vital signs and neural activity. What he saw should have been impossible. The human was maintaining individual consciousness while being actively converted by devourer technology. His brain patterns showed signs of strain, but they remained distinctly human. How long can he maintain resistance? Walsh asked. Unknown, Brooks replied. His modifications were theoretical. This is the first field test. Inside the Devourer mothership, Martinez moved through corridors that were a nightmare fusion of machine and living tissue. The walls pulsed with organic rhythms, and the air itself seemed alive with microscopic organisms designed to accelerate conversion. His destination was the central processing core, the heart of the hive mind where all thoughts and decisions originated. Getting there required him to navigate through security systems that operated on principles no human had ever encountered. But Martinez had advantages that the Devourers could not have anticipated. His partially converted state allowed him to interface with their technology, while his human consciousness let him understand it in ways the collective could not imagine. He was like a virus that had learned to mimic healthy cells. The central core was a vast chamber filled with neural networks that spanned multiple dimensions. Organic computers the size of buildings processed information from across the galaxy, while living cables carried thoughts and commands to distant fleets. Martinez approached the main interface, a structure that looked like a cross between a tree and a computer terminal. Touching it would complete his connection to the hive mind and allow him to upload Dr. Brooks' cognitive virus. It would also likely complete his conversion, destroying whatever remained of his individual consciousness. He hesitated for only a moment. Then he placed his hands on the interface and opened his mind to the collective. The sensation was indescribable. Suddenly, Martinez could feel the thoughts and experiences of millions of converted beings. He could sense devourer ships across the galaxy, each one connected to this central intelligence. He could see through 1,000 different sets of eyes and process information at superhuman speeds, but he could also feel the collective trying to absorb him completely. His human thoughts were being analyzed, categorized, and prepared for integration into the hive network. Soon, there would be nothing left of Tony Martinez except useful memories and skills. Fighting against the overwhelming pressure of collective consciousness, Martinez activated the virus that Dr. Brooks had designed. It was not a simple computer program, but a complex psychological construct designed to introduce concepts that the hive mind could not process. Individual identity, personal responsibility, the fear of death as a unique entity rather than just another replaceable unit. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The hive mind, which had operated for millennia as a perfect collective, suddenly began experiencing thoughts and emotions it had never encountered. Millions of converted beings began to remember what it felt like to be individuals. They began to question their place in the collective. They began to fear their own mortality. The cognitive virus spread through the network like wildfire. Devourer ships across the galaxy began malfunctioning as their crews experienced psychological conflicts they could not resolve. The perfect unity of the collective fractured into millions of separate minds, each one suddenly aware of its own existence and terrified of losing it. Virus upload complete, Martinez managed to transmit before the connection overwhelmed him completely. On the nightfall, Dr. Brooks watched his instruments as the Devourer network began to collapse. Ships that had been operating in perfect coordination were now attacking each other. The mining facility that Adams and Morrison had been torturing suddenly went silent as its converted population either died or reverted to some semblance of individual consciousness. Phase 2 successful, he reported to Colonel Walsh. The hive network is fragmenting. But the victory came at a cost. Martinez's vital signs were becoming increasingly erratic as the conversion process reached its final stages. His human neural patterns were being overwhelmed by alien technology, and his modifications could not protect him much longer. "Can we extract him?" Walsh asked. Brooks studied his readouts carefully. "Unknown. His biological structure has been significantly altered. Even if we could retrieve him, he might no longer be human in any meaningful sense." The truth was worse than Brooks admitted. Martinez was trapped inside the Devourer mothership as it began to self-destruct. The cognitive virus had not just disrupted the Hive network, it had driven the collective intelligence insane. The ship's systems were failing as its controlling. Intelligence tore itself apart with newfound concepts of individual mortality and personal responsibility. But Martinez had completed his mission. The Devourer threat was ending not through military victory, but through psychological destruction. The enemy had been defeated by being forced to experience what it meant to be truly alive, and therefore truly mortal. The collapse began in the Outer Rim territories, where Devourer forces had been consolidating their latest conquests. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly veered off course, their crews experiencing something they had never felt before: confusion. On the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, Admiral Kethavor watched the tactical displays with growing amazement and horror. Across dozens of star systems, Devourer fleets were turning on each other with savage intensity. "What are we seeing?" he asked Dr. Brooks, who was monitoring the situation from his position at the human observation station. "The death of a collective consciousness," Brooks replied calmly, making notes on his tablet. "And the birth of millions of individual minds. The cognitive virus that Captain Martinez had sacrificed himself to plant was spreading through the Devourer network faster than anyone had anticipated. Each converted being that experienced individual consciousness became a new carrier, passing the psychological infection to others through the very connections that had once unified them." On the main screen, they watched a massive Devourer battlecruiser suddenly open fire on its own support vessels. The ship's movements were erratic, almost desperate, as if it was trying to escape from something that could not be outrun. "The ship's crew is experiencing individual mortality for the first time," Dr. Brooks explained. "They are suddenly aware that they can die as unique entities rather than just replaceable components. The fear is overwhelming them." General Mordak studied the readings with disbelief. "Their weapon systems are more powerful than anything we have, but they are using them to destroy each other rather than attacking us. They cannot distinguish between self and other anymore," Brooks continued. "The concept of individual identity is spreading through their network like a plague. Each mind that achieves consciousness becomes terrified of losing it again." But the virus's effects went beyond simple fear. As more Devourer units experienced individual consciousness, they began to remember fragments of their original lives before conversion. A ship's crew might suddenly recall being a peaceful mining colony, and the horror of what they had become would drive them to acts of desperate violence. Lieutenant Morrison, monitoring communications from his position, looked up with something that might have been disturbing satisfaction. "We are receiving surrender broadcasts from 17 Devourer facilities. They are begging for the voices in their heads to stop." "Voices?" Admiral Kethavor asked. "Individual thoughts," Morrison explained. "For beings that have only known collective consciousness, having separate minds must feel like a form of madness." The irony was not lost on anyone present. The Devourers had spent millennia converting other species into mindless components of their collective. Now they were experiencing the reverse process, being forced to become individuals whether they wanted to or not. On the planet Kepler 442, the former human colony that had been one of the Devourer's first conquests, something unprecedented was happening. The converted population was beginning to resist the collective programming that had controlled them for months. Dr. Sarah Kim, a xenobiologist who had been absorbed during the initial attack, found herself standing in the middle of a conversion facility with no memory of how she had gotten there. Around her, thousands of other converted beings were experiencing similar confusion as their individual personalities began to reassert themselves. "Where am I?" she whispered, and the sound of her own voice using personal pronouns sent shock waves through the local network node. Other converted beings began to respond, each one asking similar questions. Who am I? What happened to me? Why can't I remember? The facility's controlling intelligence tried to reassert collective discipline, but the virus had already spread too far. Individual consciousness was emerging throughout the population, like flowers blooming after a long winter. And with that consciousness came memory, and with memory came understanding of what had been done to them. The reaction was explosive. Converted beings who remembered their former lives began attacking the facility's infrastructure with desperate fury. They tore apart conversion equipment, destroyed communication networks, and fought against the very technology that had made them part of the collective. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On every world the Devourers had conquered, converted populations were experiencing violent psychological liberation. Some went insane from the trauma of remembering their original identities. Others died rather than remain connected to the collective network. But many survived, and their newfound individuality spread the virus further. Colonel Walsh observed the chaos from the Nightfall's command center with clinical detachment. Her plan was working better than even she had anticipated, but the results were more devastating than anyone had imagined. "Casualty estimates?" she asked Sergeant Adams. "Difficult to calculate," Adams replied. "The virus is causing approximately 60% of converted beings to die during the consciousness restoration process. Those who survive are experiencing severe psychological trauma. And the remainder? Approximately 30% are going insane. 10% are achieving stable individual consciousness." Walsh nodded as if these numbers were acceptable losses. In her mind, they probably were. The alternative had been the extinction of all free-willed life in the galaxy. But the virus was not finished. As it spread through the Devourer network, it began to affect systems that had been converted centuries ago. Ancient battle fleets that had been operating as perfect collective units for generations suddenly found themselves filled with beings who remembered what it felt like to have personal desires and fears. The psychological shock was too much for most of them. Ships began self-destructing rather than continue existing in a state that their crews perceived as torture. Others turned their weapons on nearby vessels in desperate attempts to silence the individual voices that were overwhelming their collective consciousness. Dr. Brooks watched the spreading destruction with obvious fascination. "The virus is exceeding all projected parameters. It appears to be self-modifying as it spreads, becoming more effective at inducing individual consciousness in each new population it encounters." "Is that good or bad?" asked General Mordak. "That depends on your perspective," Brooks replied. "From a strategic standpoint, it is excellent. The Devourer threat will be completely eliminated within days rather than months. From a humanitarian standpoint—" He did not finish the sentence, but everyone understood. The cure they had unleashed was destroying the Devourers as completely as the Devourers had once destroyed their victims. Millions of converted beings were dying as their minds were forcibly liberated from collective control. On the main tactical display, they could see the progression of the virus across the galaxy. Star systems that had been under Devourer control for decades were suddenly going dark as their infrastructure collapsed. Ships that had operated in perfect harmony were now scattered debris fields where crews had turned on each other in psychological desperation. But perhaps most disturbing of all were the messages that had begun arriving from Devourer facilities that were still partially functional. Converted beings who retained enough individual consciousness to communicate were sending desperate pleas to the Galactic Council. "Please help us," one transmission begged. "We remember who we were before. We remember our families, our homes, our dreams, but we cannot escape what we have become. Please end our suffering." Admiral Kethivor listened to these pleas with growing horror. "They are asking us to kill them." "Some fates are worse than death," Colonel Walsh observed quietly. "They understand that now." The virus continued to spread, carrying with it the concepts that the collective mind could not process. Individual identity, personal responsibility, the knowledge that each mind was unique and irreplaceable. These ideas, which form the foundation of all free-willed civilization, were proving to be the perfect weapon against a species that had abandoned such concepts entirely. Within 72 hours of Martinez's sacrifice, the Devourer threat was effectively over. Their fleets were destroyed, their facilities abandoned, and their collective consciousness shattered into millions of individual fragments that could no longer function as a unified force. But the victory had come at a cost that would haunt the galaxy for generations. The humans had not just defeated the Devourers, they had forced an entire species to experience the psychological trauma of unwanted consciousness. They had weaponized the very concepts of identity and mortality, turning them into instruments of mass destruction. As the last Devourer facility went silent, Colonel Walsh allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mission was complete. Earth had fulfilled its promise to help the Galactic Council, but she also knew that the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. They had seen what humans were capable of when they stopped holding back, and the knowledge would change everything. Some victories, she reflected again, were harder to live with than defeats, but they were still victories, and sometimes that had to be enough.